Welcome to Man Up. On this episode, we'll have my favorite pastor, Jim Balzano. Stay tuned.
Man Up is a series that challenges men to become strong, unique, discipled followers of Jesus. Hosts Troy Ferguson, Brent Zimmerman, and Victor Thomas. Welcome to Man Up.
Impact Productions, a multi-layer technology company providing on-site, online, and in-studio video services. Contact Impact Productions to capture your story.
Welcome back to Man Up. Today we have a special guest with us. Actually, it's a special guest host. Pastor Jim Balzano is going to be joining us on this show. And for those of you that may or may not know, I've worked with Pastor Jim for over 21 years now. So the questions that we're going to get into are actually something that I actually have firsthand on experience with. We're going to get into some things with leadership. So Pastor Jim, as we start today, in the realm of leadership, talk about the importance of empowering those under your leadership.
Well, I think when I begin to think about this subject, first of all, before we can talk about the importance of empowering leadership, is that we've got to empower the right people. Because for us, what we were able to do is find the right people to empower. You can't empower everybody. You have to have people, leaders such as yourself, our other pastors on staff, and they were the people with the right spirit, the right heart, the right passion and drive and motivation. Then you can empower that. So I think that was the first thing we did. But from there, the importance is, the more you empower your people, the more powerful your people become. The more you empower your people, the more empowered the organization comes, the church comes, the business comes. And so the importance of it is the more you empower them, the more powerful your organization is.
That's good stuff. You know, you guys, since I've worked with him, I'll share with you, Pastor Jim is not one of those leaders that's a micromanaging leader. Matter of fact, he is such a hands-off, empowering leader. I would say, I believe that you have a list of expectations, and it's pretty much you give me the ability and authority to do it how I feel I should do it best. Very few times have you said, Troy, why aren't you doing these three things or this or that? And so talk a little bit about that whole micromanaging versus empowering approach to leadership.
Again, it goes back to, you don't have to micromanage somebody who has motivation. You don't hire unmotivated people or people without ambition. Now, you don't want people with personal ambition. You want them to be able to frame that personal ambition. But they have to have ambition, they have to have drive, motivation. And then what happens is, you know, for example, you were hired because you were already in the body doing it. Okay, other people have been the same way that we've hired. They were in the body, their gift made room for them. The fact that they had drive, the right heart. And so we don't need to micromanage people who have the drive and the passion, such as yourself, okay? And so what do I do then? So then, I'm not looking for a list of things for you to do, but here's the big picture, and then you're skilled enough, others are skilled enough to figure out how to do it. And so I don't count hours. We count production, are things getting done. So that's, I think it's incredibly important.
Yeah, I could talk to him about this all day. Any questions?
Yeah, so explain empowerment. How do you say you want to empower somebody when you get the right person? What's empowerment to you, or how do you do that?
It's giving them the right tools they need. Okay, so, you know, and one of the things he's done over the years, he's done a lot of good job with, you know, we didn't always have the most money back in the day to get some things, but he did the best with what we could provide him. So one, it's giving the tools, okay? Secondly, is giving the permission to not have to come to me for every decision. Not coming and saying, well, can I do this, can I do that? But giving the permission to do the job. And then providing a safe place for somebody to fail. And there's going to be mistakes, okay? There's very few things that aren't fixable. And when you have people in a culture where they're afraid to fail, then they won't succeed as much, and you can't empower them because they know, well, if I mess up, I'm going to be in trouble, something negative is going to happen. But it has to be a safe place to fail. The other thing is allow their dreams to be a part of the big vision. Okay, so in other words, so how do I fuel a dream that Troy has for joining a city while that's parallel to what we're doing as a church. And so we blow wind into dreams. And to me, those are the things that we do to empower.
Yeah, it's good stuff.
You know, I've found that effective leaders know that they don't always have to exert their power.
Right.
And I remember Adrian Rogers had once said, he gave an analogy of the difference between leaders and management. He made the analogy of people going through the jungles, and there are people with machetes, and behind the people with machetes chopping it down were the managers. But the leader was somebody who climbed the tree and made sure we were in the right jungle.
Right.
And so when I look at that, and I've heard people pray about this church and about you, Pastor Jim, that you are a light in this city. So I just wanted to commend you for that, because it's definite that you're in the right jungle and you're doing the right thing, empowering people up under you. And that's a mark of those people who can pick the right people, as you said, the motivated people. In our business with Gloria Gates, we look for the people who have empathy. So those people, they already have that motivation. You just have to train them on what they're going to do.
Right. Yeah. Thank you.
Good. That's good. You know, you've been a leader in the secular culture business as well as the church. Talk a little bit about the differences in leadership.
That's a good question.
I think the leadership principles themselves transfer. Okay, leadership is leadership, the principles are principles. But I think what you have to look at is sometimes those you lead, their motivations are different. So for example, when you're at a business, you are having somebody who's there that they want to make money, they want a job, they want to make as much money as they can. And so the motivation is more their family, their money, so forth. Within the church realm, we deal with a lot of volunteers. We have our paid staff, but then we have a lot of volunteers. They're not getting paid. And so that has to be where they are here because of the cause, the mission, the vision. And so what we have to do there is we have to get them to buy in. We've got to cast vision, and we've got to, because they're not here for the money. There's no money. You can't hold it over their head, if you will.
Right.
All right? And so you have to cast a compelling vision to get them to buy in, to go over and above and beyond. All right? People will, when you can paint a compelling vision, people will give and work and go over and above and beyond. To me, that's one of the biggest differences between the two.
And you preached a message one time, one of the first messages I ever heard back at the old church. I call it the old church. The cause. And I know we had this conversation before, but I remember how that message to me was very compelling about the story of Jesus Christ. And it was more than just me and you. It was the cause of the cross. And it was, when you mentioned about the cause, that was something that kind of popped back into my head and reminded me, I love that message. You got to dig it up and do it again.
I don't even remember it. But it is all about the cause. And you got to get people to buy into it. You just have to. And because the vision comes from God. All we're doing is we're casting it now to the people. It's not our vision, it's his vision. And how do I then effectively, compellingly cast that to people to buy into?
Right.
Yeah. You know, Pastor Jim, we talked a bit about leadership styles and things. If you can give some practical tips on developing leadership skills in others, what are some thoughts that are practical things that people can do in that realm?
You mean how to develop it in the other people?
Yeah.
Well, you kind of got to do the Moses Joshua thing. You have to take that person, you've got to give them some authority, you have to give them some responsibility, and then you have to let them run with it. Okay, and then you come back and you tweak it. Okay, this is where it went well, this is where it didn't go well, we can fix this. But without opportunity, they cannot learn. I grew up in the tire business, okay? My father owned the tire business. We fixed tires on cold trucks, off-the-road equipment. And when I was 13 years old, there wasn't a tire I could not fix, okay? There were times my mother would drive the service truck and I would do the work because I couldn't drive. But how did that happen? Because from the time I was 8, my father was giving me opportunity to hit my leg with a hammer, opportunity to make a mistake. And that opportunity then made me into being able to do what I do. And so the only way you can develop effective leadership skills in people is to give them opportunities to lead and coach them and give it a safe place to fail and praise them when it does well. So that's, opportunity has to be the thing.
So
But it's
when you
also-
bring them in-
oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry, brother. Good. When you bring them in, you give them clearly defined roles, or you point out what their role is so that they can grow in that role.
I think everybody coming in that we hire knows their role, okay? And but yet there's always a lot of flux within those roles, as you know, because we got, okay? But everybody knows their role, and what I'm here to do is, here's the picture, here's what we want, And then like Troy will say, okay, this is how I think we can get there. All right, and so I empower him then to do that.
Sure.
So go do that, and then we evaluate it, look at it, okay, we need to tweak this, that, or whatever.
Right.
So,
But you spent many years too leading by example, taking people and showing them this is, without saying this is how you do it, you just did it. And because of your charisma, your attitude, and how you treat others, people follow that. They're magnetized to that. Do you understand what I'm saying? So like when I think of a leader, and this is what reminds me of back in November, the Nehemiah Project, it was cold, it was raining that night, and what was you doing outside? Changing a flat tire. And I thought, that's a leader. That should be out there, the guy doing that for him, you know what I mean? So that was one of the things that kind of, a little light bulb went off and thought, man, that's a true leader. You're right, you do have to lead by example.
Yeah.
If you want people to follow you, you got to get in the trenches and dig the dirt with them as well.
absolutely, absolutely.
You know, most of the guest hosts we have on here, we talk about their ministry or their church and so forth. I didn't necessarily do that with Pastor Jim, because he'll probably be on here several times. But he's the pastor of Transformation Church. But one of the things that I love about him is his focus isn't, and this isn't a bad thing, but isn't focused on just the walls in the internal church. He's looking at impacting a community. And I've been with him, like I said, over 20 years. And if we could just touch briefly on, as a pastor, before you got into the right place for kids, that's going to be a different show altogether.
It's a monster.
But as a pastor of a local church, you stepped out and did the 11th Street Project, which wasn't connected to our church at all. What is it that as a leader, as a pastor, as a visionary, prompted you to do that, to step out and take on that project?
Well, I think first of all, it's who God wired me to be. Okay, I'm a pastor, I'm a shepherd. And yet there are pastors, chaplains that are more of the, much better than I am at doing the weddings, the funerals, the counseling, and all that type of shepherding work. But then there's, when I say this word, I want you to understand I'm talking about function, not title, not role, but an apostolic function. I'm a pastoral apostolic function, which is looking outside of the church, looking into the city. How do we take ground from the enemy? How do we plant the kingdom of God? How do we take it there? And so that's how he wired me to think. And what God did was blessed me and put me in a church that has allowed me to be that.
Yes.
Okay, because you could get into a church that wouldn't allow you to be that. No, we want you to captain the big, happy Christian love boat. Okay, okay, and so that's just who I am. It's how God wired me.
Yeah.
Okay, and so that's and again, God put me with a church that allows me to do that.
And you know, it's interesting how God aligned that, because you, as being a person, I am doing this show right here today with Joy, under the umbrella of Joy in the City, because of that same mentality. Because a lot of times, if I would say, hey, I want to do a show that's not connected to my job or the church, no, you know, 8 to 5 or whatever it is, this is your job. He is an empowering person outside, so that you've enjoyed that, and you've also done that. So we're going to come back here and talk about some more stuff. Will you stick around for our next segment?
Oh, I guess.
We'll be right back.
Hello, my name is Ann Byler. You may know me better as Auntie Ann of Aunt Ann's Soft Pretzels. I'm really looking forward to being with you in Altoona. I believe the date is October the 24th at the Prayer Breakfast. I'm going to be sharing my story, our story of faith, and how we navigated through the twists and the turns of our business life and also our personal lives. So I hope that you come and join us at the breakfast. And until then, blessings to you, and I look forward to seeing you there.
Well, welcome back to Man Up. We're going to continue our discussion with Pastor Jim. We're going to get on a subject that God put on my heart based upon some things that I have seen, and whether read online or just experienced in my friendship. So this is a discussion for all of us. In our culture today, it's tough to tell the difference between someone who is confident versus arrogant. Let's begin by discussing what is the difference between arrogance and confidence.
Wow, that's tough.
It is a tough one. There's a fine line there for
It's
sure.
definitely, I mean, speaking for myself, someone with a background in sports, you see that where there is such a fine line between having confidence in what you're trying to achieve and the arrogance in which you overstep things and you think that you're entitled to certain things. You take blue chippers who may step on a football field because their father was a professional ball player, or they have a lineage of being a blue blood. I think there gets to be a point of arrogance there. So in leadership, it's really tough to put that into words, the difference between confidence and arrogance. I'd go back to the abuse of power. A good leader knows when to exercise and practice authority and use power, and those who are arrogant will overuse it and step down on people.
Yeah, such as the attitude or even the actions behind what they're saying will back up, in my opinion, whether it's confidence or whether it's arrogance. You can see the difference in somebody when they say something in their expressions on their face or so. I would have to say I'd fault to the attitude or the behavior of the person, and then
That's a good point.
think about it from there.
One of the things I read a variety of things on social media. And it's interesting, I don't believe that from a pulpit per se would a pastor be arrogant. They may come strong with a viewpoint and seeming to be confident. But it seems like when we hit, and I can't believe I'm saying this because some of our discussions about the negative, I actually believe that social media can be very positive and a benefit. But at the same time, there's an approach that people take that they, first of all, they think they're an authority on something, and then they get very, very harsh and arrogant on social media. And I look at news, I look at late night television, and there's just such a harsh, almost a bullying approach to certain concepts. And I just wonder, where do we get confidence is a good thing, but there seems to be that line that we can easily cross over. Pastor Jim, what are your thoughts on how do we?
Paul wrote, I wrote a scripture down for this, that Paul wrote in 2 Corinthians, he said, "Such is the confidence we have towards God through Christ. Not that we are adequate in ourselves so as to consider anything as having come from ourselves, but our adequacy is from God, who also made us adequate as servants of a new covenant." And I thought about that. Biblical confidence, to me, is confidence that comes through competence that comes from God. That I know that any competence I have to get something done, to accomplish something, that doesn't come from me.
Right.
That comes from God. Arrogance is competence in myself, in ourselves. And so there's, to me, is a dividing line. Think about this. David goes to battle against Goliath confidently, not because of his own competence, but rather the competence that came from God.
Sure.
Goliath came into the battle, on the other hand, in arrogance, competence in himself. Saul and the army of Saul would not face Goliath because they had no confidence.
Yes.
And they didn't. But David's confidence wasn't in himself; it was confidence that came from God's competence.
That's right.
And so when I define those two, arrogance is when I have competence or adequacy in myself. Confidence, from a biblical perspective, is having confidence in the competence God gives me. Because I know me and myself. Listen, much of the stuff that we've ever done ain't because of me. As a matter of fact, it might be in spite of me. All right? And God has just given us the ability to get it done.
Yeah.
Brent, what are your thoughts?
I like what Pastor Jim had to say. It's, again, perspective of whether we're going to look into ourselves or are we going to point to God and give God the glory in the situation or whatever it is that we're dealing with. And I can relate to a lot of this because I had this conversation with Pastor Jim a few days ago. And I said, man, there's nothing special about me. Like, there's nothing like, I'm not a great marketer. I'm not a great this. I'm not a great that. But yet, in spite of myself and what we do to glorify God through our business, God has placed his hand upon it and has blessed it. And I can always look back and say, I can always point to God, hey, I can give you the glory because I know it's definitely not me. He could have chose anybody, but why he chose me, I don't know. I don't have that thing or that, you know what I mean? Like that pizzazz that somebody else may have. I know a lot of companies that do what we do or do what the owners could. I look at them and think, man, you're better than I at this, or you're better than I at that. Your TikTok, your Facebook, your Instagram, all those things. And it's like I just feel like a complete failure in some of those things, but yet, God, someone will tell me, I seen that video, and I kind of like started following you on Facebook, and then we called you for a roof estimate, and here you are putting a roof on. So it's always to give God the glory and always remember that, It's not about us, it's about him. When we start looking inwards, that's where I think you become arrogant and cocky. When you point back to Jesus and say, Jesus, you're the reason, you know.
Yeah, because success often then is the breeding ground for arrogance. We're humble
that's true.
until we have success. And the next thing you know, we're like the King Uzziah, where all of a sudden now I want to be a priest because of my success here. You know, and so that's what, you're absolutely right.
So how as leaders, how do we be strong in our beliefs and confident in what we're doing and not appearing to be disrespectful or offensive to others who are feeling that we're arrogant? But you know, how do you take this concept and communicate something, and someone says, "Oh, you're just being arrogant"? No, it's confidence. I mean, I think that is something it's a communication thing that I'm seeing is been troubling. So
I would default back to that person's perspective, and perspective has been a good conversation with me for the last week with many people. You know, like how can you walk into a church service and, man, I come out on cloud nine, and the person I came with, you know, man, what did he say? Why did he say it like that? It's like it's how they receive that perspective. You know, I always try to find the good in everything. You know what I mean? Like if something went sour, man, there had to be something good that happened. There had to be something, a lesson to be learned, even if it was, you know, a lot of times, like when I went to jail as a youngster, man, I used to think, what did I do? How did I do that? Why did I get here? And trying to find the good in that was the best thing I want to do is I'm not going to repeat this mistake again, man. It's got to stop. But it's perspective. It's how we have to take a look at the situation and how it was presented. I know sometimes things come off a little harsh, and you get corrected on social media or something. You get back and you think, my wife and I had a discussion about a post I put up last week. I thought it was on point, and she was like, that is kind of arrogant and harsh. And I'm like, no, it's not. Amy, that's not what I'm trying to say.
Right.
People are taking it that way. They're pretty upset. Look at your post. And, you know, and then I had a discussion with my assistant pastor. And I ended up taking the post down because it wasn't because I was ashamed necessarily of the post, but it was how it was coming off to somebody else. I don't want to offend them in Christ in that nature when you need to be bringing them to Christ rather than pushing them away.
And that, in all reality, and Pastor Jim has preached on this a couple dozen times. All reality, we do need to be careful with what we post.
We do.
Because
Sure.
especially just like a text message or whatever, there can be a time that we have a response, maybe a quick, harsh response, and it was like, I'm just going to type this, and then people take it not in the way that we meant it, or people don't know the backstory or that. So we do have to be cautious in those moments. But I want to, real quickly here, just in a few moments we have left, Paul talks in 1 Corinthians 8, Paul talks about freedoms. The confidence in his freedom, but he does not exercise arrogance. What can we learn from Paul in this?
Oh, okay. Paul endured a lot. Paul suffered a lot, but yet he still gave God all the glory. If he said he had anything to boast in, it was boasting in the sufferings of preaching the gospel of Jesus Christ. And if we could change our perspective to that we don't have anything in ourselves to boast about, that it's all about to bring God glory, all point back to Jesus Christ. And even, you know, if I got something to boast about, I'm going to boast about the lashes I took and the lashes before that and how many times I've been shipwrecked. And it's all to preach the gospel. It's all for the glory of God.
And isn't it a good thing that there will be no boasting in heaven because we have life eternity? I wouldn't want to live up there with somebody who's just going to boast and brag all day long. But that thing you said about perspective is keen. And one of the things I try to do is to not have a limited frame of reference, but consider someone else's perspective before I speak. So before I put something on a post, how is this going to sound to somebody else? And, you know, in today's society, people are so easily offended. It's, you know, one of those things where you have to watch what you say. It's going to be twisted around. So understanding how people may perceive what you're saying and understanding that they have their own perspective about it and looking from their perspective as well before you post something.
You know, Paul talked about in 1 Corinthians 8 about meat being sacrificed to idols. Okay, so he had a truth and he had what was going on. And you understand the context of that. When meat was sacrificed to an idol, there were three things that happened to it. One, it was offer to the God that they're offering. Secondly, the worshiper would take some home. And then there was third, there was some be taken to the meat market. And it could be bought there at a cheaper price. So now the issue in the Corinthian church was, can I, a Christian, eat that meat that was sacrificed to an altar or an idol? So Paul says, first of all, he talks about the difference between knowledge and love. Okay, he said knowledge puffs up, love edifies. All right, so I think that's the first thing we have to understand is that we need to operate in a spirit of love. Okay, and so Paul's knowledge told him, I can eat that meat. Okay, I'm not sinning. I can faithfully, before God, eat that meat, because he also said there is no such thing as an idol. That's what he literally says, because he said all things come from God, and he went through that scripture and he said there's no such thing as an idol, therefore there's no meat to an idol. But regardless, so what he basically said was that love trumps knowledge, okay? Paul's knowledge of the truth said he could eat the meat. Now I got a choice. I can eat it, flaunt it before you, I can do what I want, blah, blah, blah. But what Paul said was, but if my eating meat causes you to stumble, may I never eat meat again.
Right. Exactly.
And so there was a humility and there was a sacrifice that said, my faith says I can, my love says I won't.
That's a good point.
And that is such a paramount place to get to.
I knew you would hit that and hit it well. Okay, so we're a little over time. Pastor Jim, thank you. I know. Thank you for hanging out with us. And we'll invite you back again, and we'll get it on your calendar. And thank you for hanging out with us. We'll be back with a quick piece of advice right after this.
When it's time for a new roof, Champion Roofing is your best choice. We're a certified award-winning roofing contractor, meaning your roof is done right the first time. Call today.
Champion Roofing, we're the solution.
Next week on Man Up, our guest will be Pastor Michael Blackie, and we'll talk about deception.
Part of what we do is we call community agency engagement. And so we're trying to get the community involved with each individual agency. And part of that that's lacking has been just this connection between them and the agency and those who are in it. So we thought, why not do the best thing that we can possibly do, and that's prayer.
All that and more on Man Up.
Today, I'd like to give you a tip on home maintenance. Most home maintenance doesn't get a lot of attention to the gutters or to the roof. The reason being for that is because it doesn't get played with a lot. What do I mean by that? That's not like a door that you walk through every day or a window that you open for fresh air. So it's not something that really gets a lot of attention, and you got to look up to see it. But today's tip would be, I would recommend getting your gutters cleaned twice a year, spring and the fall time. Also, it's a good time to have the contractor take a look at the roof. Look at penetrations such as your chimney, pipe vents. Make sure the boots are installed properly, that they're not cracked or worn out, the water's not seeping through them. Also, another telltale story is if you can get into your attic or your crawl space, you can see water stains or water marks. And that's today's tip. Join us next week on another episode of Man Up.
This segment is brought to you by Harry's Construction, whose motto is, if you can dream it, we can create it. They are the kitchen and bath design experts, so call Harry's Construction for all your remodeling needs.